Hello, welcome to Web of Stories. My name is Melinda, and I am here with some recommendations for you for Read Historical Fiction. We have 5 prompts. Each host submitted a prompt, and so I have 3 to 4 recommendations for each prompt, and then I will also tell you what I am planning to read for that prompt. It's a plan. They could always change, but here you go. So our first prompt was from Shelley, who originated this wonderful event, and that is read a work of historical fiction about a real remarkable person. And my first example here, remarkable doesn't mean hero, because I have one who really isn't. And this book is The Mare by Angharad, Hampshire. This book, I believe, is still in the running for the Walter Scott Prize. I think it's on the short list. I don't know if that award's been awarded yet. I follow Katie at Books and Things, like all of her talk on it. So Katie hasn't said otherwise. But this is about Harmony, who, I forgot her last name, doesn't matter. She was an Austrian woman actually, but during World War II, she had worked first at Ravensbrück and then at a death camp in Poland. After the war, about 10 years after the war, she meets an American. They fall in love, they get married, she comes to the United States to live with him, and everything's good for about 10 years. And then the New York Times comes knocking on their door. She has been found through the work of Simon Wiesenthal, who was the Nazi hunter. And at this point, her husband, who kind of knew that she'd worked in a prison, it's like he kind of knew that, but he didn't know exactly what had happened. He finds out that not only did she work in Nazi death camps, but she was known as the Mare, because among the horrendous things that she's accused of doing, she would kick people to death. She then has to go, her U.S. citizenship is revoked at that point. She has to go back to Germany and stand trial. And this follows her and her husband through all that. It's a very interesting book to read. And as I've said before, this is a really important book for Americans to be reading now. And yes, it is available in the United States now. It will cause you to question some things, to really kind of look at how you kind of are seeing some of the current things in the world. What I really found interesting on this book is how her husband was written, because her husband is going through this whole process of discovery at the same time, but also this is the woman he loves, and how does he square that and what happens. So that is The Mare by Angharad, Hampshire. The second book I have is a challenge. This is a very difficult book to read in 2 areas. One is the prose of it is very difficult, and the second is the content. So this book is The Lost Journals of Sacajewea by Deborah Magpie Earling. Earling is I always have to look it up. Is she Blackfoot? She's Bitterroot-Slish, which I think is in the, I'm not sure. She is an indigenous author, and this is basically Sacajewea's journals. Had she kept journals? What makes this so difficult to read is Earling really follows native speech patterns and native use of language and imagery in her writing, which can be very difficult for people who are not used to that. And she doesn't apologize for it, which she shouldn't. She shouldn't. This is the way it would have been. I think maybe if you read a lot of poetry, it might be a little easier for you. I don't know about the audiobook. I don't know anyone who's read the audiobook, but it might be the audiobook is a little bit easier to listen to, a little bit easier. But if you're able to get through the language, this book is really worth it. This is just an amazing book. Content-wise, there's some really hard stuff that happens in it. But all of the hard stuff that happened conceivably could have happened to Sacajewea. There's nothing out of the ordinary. All this stuff is definite possibility of things that could have happened in her life. Really excellent book for those who are up for the challenge. And the third book I have is one that I read for one of my book groups, but it's been out for a while. It's pretty well known. It's In the Time of Butterflies by Julia Alvarez, and this follows the Mirabel sisters of the Dominican Republic. These are 3 sisters who rebelled against the government. Things happened. I'm not going to go into it, but they're really interesting women, and they had a really interesting story. And I think that their story really deserves to be better known in the world than I think they are pretty well known. Obviously they are in the Dominican Republic, but I think just generally in the United States, they should be better known. Really fascinating book. I knew a little bit about them reading the book. Like I knew the basics of their story only because shortly before I read this, Stuff We Missed on History Class, Stuff You Missed in History Class podcast did an episode on them. That was the first I'd heard of them. So they are really someone that people should know more of. And historical fiction is a great way to get to know them. Now, what I plan to read is I'm actually planning to continue in a series that I will be starting in May. I will be starting it after I film this, like the next week. I'm filming this on the 16th of May. I think I'm starting this on the 19th, 18th or 19th of May, the first book in the series. And this is the second. And it should be no surprise who this is over. This is Anne Boleyn, The King's Obsession. I don't need to tell you what this is about or who it's about. It's right there, Anne Boleyn. This is by Alison Weir. So yeah, real person. She's kind of a hot topic one. I have this entire series of the 6 Tudor Queens and I haven't read any of them yet. So I think I'm just going to like work through them month by month. And it just so happens this one is the one that will be happening in June. So the next prompt is read a work of historical fiction about the arts, theater, film, painting, architecture, music, whatever. The first one, we're going to go back to the Walter Scott Prize, and we're going to talk about the book that I have talked about a lot. I have told everyone I know to read it. I have cheered it when people have read this book. This was on my best books that I read last year, and that is Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lennon. Again, I'm not sure if the Walter Scott Prize has been announced yet, but this is on the short list. And it is set after the Peloponnesian War. So ancient Greece time. And it's set on Syracuse, which is on Sicily. And they were the victors in this. And the Athenian prisoners of war have basically been thrown into a gravel pit to die. And the Syracusans just like to come and watch them like in the afternoon. Like they're like basically a zoo and they're, but these two guys, these sort of like ne'er-do-well guys, Syracusans, they've realized that these Athenians know about Euripides. And they know Greek theater, and these two men want to see Greek theater. So they convince the prisoners to perform Euripides for them. I loved this book. I just really loved this book. It is funny, but it's not light. So there's definitely humor in it, but it is not, I would not say a comic book at all. Very heartfelt. I mean, I have raved about this book enough. So just read this book if you haven't already. Read Glorious Exploits. The second book I have is The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. So this would also fall under the real person umbrella if you wanted to do it for that one. And this is about Lucretia, the Duchess of Ferrara. So she was married to Alfonso, a duke, an Italian duke. At this time, Italy was not a nation as we know it. This is the Renaissance period. It was a city-states. She's a young teenager. She's married to a duke. And the duke commissions a portrait, a marriage portrait of her. So that is the marriage portrait of the title. And there is a lot in this book about the actual painting of the portrait. It is a real picture. You can look it up. And I learned a lot about like all the different steps they do to do these really beautiful portraits. There's a lot in that. But the plot of this is she marries him and a year later she's dead. And it is believed at the time that her husband killed her. Whether or not he did, you can Wikipedia that because they've kind of figured it out by now. But don't worry about that. Just read the book because this was a really wonderful book. I enjoyed it quite a bit. And there is quite a lot about art in here. And my third book is one I'm going to have to kind of look up. I read this years and years and years ago, and I really enjoyed it, but I don't remember all the details, but I would highly recommend it. Let's see if I gave it a rating. I gave this a 5-star rating, and this is The Birth of Venus by Sarah Dunant. We are still in Renaissance Italy. Where are we? Are we in Florence? We are still in Florence. We're in Florence now. And another 15-year-old or another teenager gets married. She's really into art and all this, and she is married to a wealthier older man, and this is during the time of Savonarola. There you go. It's a hard guy. He was like an evangelical of Renaissance Italy, capital E. So there is quite a bit about art in here because she is very much involved in art. There is also an artist in this book. Really love this. I've had great luck with Sarah Dunant's books. She writes a lot about Renaissance Italy. This one, fantastic. Chef's kiss. Would highly recommend it. It's a great place to start with her. Her books are not in a series other than she has 2 Borgia books later on that you might have to read 1 and 2. I can't remember. But this is a great starting point with her. And I will be reading The Flames by Sophie Haydock. Let me read the back of this one. Obviously, I haven't read it, so I can't tell you exactly what it's about, so I'll just read the back. A new century is dawning. Vienna is at its zenith, an opulent, extravagant city teeming with art, music, and radical ideas. It's a place where anything seems possible. Allergies. Edith and Adele are sisters, the daughters of a wealthy bourgeois family. They are expected to follow the rules, to marry well, and produce children. Gertrude is enthralled to her flamboyant older brother. Marked by a traumatic childhood, she envies the freedom he so readily commands. Vali was born into poverty, but is making her way in the world as a model for the eminent artist Gustav Klimt. Fierce, passionate, and determined, none of these women is quite what they seem, but their lives are set on a collision course when they become entangled with the controversial young artist Ion Schiele, whose work and private life are sending shockwaves through Viennese society. All it will take is a simple act of betrayal to set their world on fire. So that is The Flames by Sophie Haydock. Okay, the next one is my category, and this is read a work of alternate historical fiction. So alternate historical fiction is where there's a little something that goes the other way, that what happened in reality, and you follow it from there. It's what if historical fiction. And I actually have 4 suggestions for this one. I know this is a little bit of a harder one. The first one I have is actually, it's a trilogy, but I will bring up the first one. And this is the Bolin King by Laura Andersen. It's the Bolin Trilogy. So the conceit of this book and this series is Anne Boleyn. We're back with our girl Anne. She's over here. I gotta get her out of my pile. I gotta keep my pile straight too. Back with Anne Boleyn. In reality, she after she gave birth to Elizabeth, she had a stillborn son. Some called him miscarried son. It was, I think, like she was second trimester. She was far enough along that they knew it was a boy. That's as far as it was. And this was the beginning of her downfall because, Henry was not the sanest of people. And this led obviously to her beheading. So the conceit of this is that child lived. That was a healthy baby and it lived. So Anne Boleyn doesn't die. Minor spoiler here, she dies in this book as an old woman. Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, Catherine Parr, Jane Seymour's kind of in it because Jane Seymour was one of Anne Boleyn's ladies in waiting, but none of that happens. Prince Edward, no, that didn't happen. So that child who is, I want to say his name is William, Henry IX, known as William. And he's like a teenager and he runs around, he's got these 2 friends and they run around, and also his older sister, Elizabeth. And this is a trilogy. It's a really good trilogy in that she really takes, there's still real history in here because even though we had that thing happen differently than in history, there's still other forces that kept going. So she really blends the history. She blends the history and the alternate history together really well. This is a trilogy. There is a second trilogy. I don't recommend the second trilogy. I just didn't. I thought this trilogy was absolutely perfect and it didn't need any more. But the first one is the Bolin King. Let me tell you what the other 2 are. The Bolin King, the Bolin Deceit, and the Bolin Reckoning. So, and again, those are by Laura Andersen. Okay. The second one I have is, I need to get the author right on this because I've been calling him something else the wrong time. This is Fatherland by Robert Harris, not Thomas Harris. Robert Harris wrote Conclave. Thomas Harris wrote Silence of the Lambs, and I thought they were the same person for a long time. But this is Fatherland. This is a mystery, and it is Hitler won World War II sort of thing. Let me read this here. I read this again several years ago. Fatherland is set in an alternate world where Hitler has won the Second World War. It is April 1964, and 1 week before Hitler's 75th birthday, Xavier March, a detective of the Kriminalpolizei, is called out to investigate the discovery of a dead body in a lake near Berlin's most prestigious suburb. That's really all you need to know. So we're in post-World War II Nazi Germany. We're still dealing with that. Hitler is still alive at this point. It says in 1 week it'll be Adolf Hitler's 75th birthday. So that is what we're dealing with. I remember this being a really good mystery. really good mystery. I'm not going to say more about it because it's one you need to read, but it's written by the same person who wrote Conclave. So, you know, they've got the bona fides. Great book. The third one I have, excuse me, these next two are kind of a little bit different. So this one is, if historical fiction is not your thing, there's always genre blends. And if you are not a historical history person, but you are a science fiction person, this would be a great one for this prompt. And this is The Calculating Stars by Mare Robinette Kowal. So the conceit of this one isn't actually something that went the other way. It's just something that happens. We're in 1950s, I guess. And a asteroid lands in the Atlantic Ocean outside of Washington, D.C., and like 300 miles in on the coast is washed away. And so Washington, D.C., New York, all of those are gone. And this follows, the main character is this woman who's a scientist, but she wants to be an astronaut. She wants to be a pilot. And they find out pretty cool, like the science in this book is good, is very, very good. But they find out that because of this asteroid, it's messed up the atmosphere, and we're going to get, like, if you've ever, the Earth is going to become uninhabitable. It's going to get cold, and then it's going to get too hot. So the race is on to be able to colonize the moon or Mars or whatever. And she very much wants to be an astronaut. Fantastic science. And this is a really interesting one because the history is so different. Like, it's not one little thing happened. We're talking, we're wiping off history and we're starting from there, but you can still follow the threads through. I do plan to read on in this series. From what I understand, this is the most historical of them because it's set in the 50s and 60s. You're more in a historical area. The rest is more science fiction-y, but excellent book. Really, it's really good. It's lots of girl power. Yeah. And that is The Calculating Stars by Mare Robinette Kowal. And the fourth one I have, this falls into, some people will consider this historical fiction, alternate historical fiction, and some people wouldn't. Personally, I do, but you decide. And this is Rodham by Curtis Sittenfeld. And I alluded to this in my announcement video. This one is Bill and Hillary didn't get married. Now, Bill and Hillary knew each other. At one point they're engaged, but they just don't get married. And what happens from there? Interesting. However, there are some Bill and Hillary sex scenes, and it's like walking in on your parents. Just saying. I will also say the way this book goes towards the end, it's a little traumatic for reasons. I can't even go there, but I enjoyed this book. I know Hillary Clinton is kind of a people feel one way or the other book, and I read this with my friends. Like, one of them doesn't care. I'm like, whatever, but one of them really didn't like Hillary Clinton. She was not conservative. She was quite liberal, but she didn't like Hillary Clinton. I will say, you're not going to come out of this feeling any different about Hillary Clinton. If you go into it not liking Hillary Clinton, you're still not going to like Hillary Clinton. If you go into this loving Hillary Clinton, you're still going to love Hillary Clinton. But really interesting. So there you go. That's Rodham by Curtis Sittenfeld. Now, for what I am reading, if you follow my channel, you have seen this before. Because it's been on my TBR a couple times. That's Farthing by Jo Walton. We're going to go back to Hitler won World War II sort of thing. And 8 years have passed since the upper crust Farthing set overthrew Winston Churchill and led Britain into a separate peace with Hitler. Now those families have gathered for a weekend retreat. Among them is a strange scion, Lucy Kahn, who can't understand why she and her husband David were so enthusiastically invited. But all becomes clear when the eminent Sir James Thurkey is found murdered with the yellow Star of David pinned to his chest. Lucy realizes that her Jewish husband is about to be framed for the crime, an outcome that would be altogether too politically convenient, given the machinations underway in Parliament in the coming weeks. The Farthing set are determined to pass laws further restricting the right to vote, and a new outcry against Jews and foreigners would suit them fine. So that's a little close to home there. But whoever's behind the murder and the frame-up didn't count on the principal investigator from Scotland Yard being so prone to look beyond the obvious, or his being a man with his own private reasons for sympathizing with outcasts and underdogs. So this is what I will be reading for that prompt. Our fourth prompt is, let me get my list ready here, is to read a work of historical fiction with a dual timeline. So what I have here, okay, so the first one I have was my favorite book of a couple years ago. Might have been my favorite book of, it was not my favorite, it was 2 years ago. Because it was my favorite year, it was 2023, it was my favorite. And that is The Postcard by Anne Berest. So this is from a library. I got this off Thrift Books and it has a little due date thing on here. This is definitely sort of autofiction. So because Anne Berest herself kind of, it's written like, this is actually based on an experience Anne Berest had. And so I don't know how far into fiction it is, how far into real history it is, but it is, she considers it a novel. So we're going to consider it a novel. So in 2003, her family is gathered together and they get a postcard. On the front is the photo of the Opera Garnier. And on the back are the names of Anne Berest's maternal great-grandparents, Ephraim, Emma, and their children, Noemi and Jacques. They were all killed at Auschwitz. That is all true. In fact, this is actually Noemi. That is actually a picture of Noemi. So 15 years after that, Anne, who is the heroine of this novel, but we assume it's Anne Berest, goes on sort of a mission with her mother to find out what's going on with this. Who sent this card? What does it all mean? So you get, that's like 2018, so it's pretty close, but still. You do also get the history of what happened with her grandmother, because her grandmother survived, obviously, because she was her grandmother. That's how that works. So we get her story, we get the story of these relatives who died in Auschwitz, but we also get the story of Anne and her mother trying to figure out what happened. So this book was just phenomenal. Loved this book. As I said, it was my top novel of 2023. I recommended it till I'm blue in the face, so please go get it because it's fantastic. There you go. And then my next book, this book is actually representative of an author because this author, all of her books would fall in the dual timeline. And this is Fiona Davis. And of course, while I'm filming, my father calls. We'll talk to him later. Fiona Davis has, and I do not mean this in a derogatory way, but it's true. She has a formula for her books. It's always set around a building in New York. So yeah, you could talk about the architecture one on that. There's a dual timeline, and it's about women, and it's great. I have really enjoyed all the books that I have read from her. I would recommend her. That being said, I also no longer read her because her book starts sounding a little samey. But I do recommend, I did really enjoy the books of hers that I read. And this is my favorite of her books. And that is The Address. So this is set, so it's, what's the name of it? It's the Dakota. Which is kind of famous because it is the hotel where John Lennon was shot. And we have a woman who has moved in there. There is a mystery, but you also have a timeline. I think the timeline, if I remember correctly, is around the time that John Lennon is shot. So you have that dual timeline going. I really enjoyed this. This was the one that sold me on Fiona Davis. I think it is her second book. But again, any book by Fiona Davis would work for this prompt. It would also probably work for the art one because she's big on the architecture. Even though I don't read her anymore, I do still heartily recommend her as an author because she is a very good writer. She also went to my alma mater, so there. But yes, that is The Address by Fiona Davis, but any book by Fiona Davis will work. Now, this final book was a case of me like looking at my shelves, or actually my piles, because my bookshelf situation, which I can't complain about anymore. But looking and going, there must be another book with a dual timeline. And then this one popped out at me because I loved this book. This book also won the Pulitzer Prize. And this is The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. So this is about the Delosier School. And this is which was also the school that was the basis for the Reformatory by Tananarive Due. And two boys meet in this school. And you get a timeline of them meeting in the school, how they ended up in the school. And then several years later, one of them is out of the school and you hear about his life now. So that is your dual timeline. I do not want to get more into this book. This is a book I really think should be required reading. I honestly think this should be required reading in high school. I think this would be a perfect book to be read for high school literature classes. Definitely, college, definitely, but high school would work as well. If you are someone who is kind of scared of Colson Whitehead after the Underground Railroad, because that is a book that didn't hit well with everybody, did not hit well with me. Not that I thought it was a bad book. I just found it kind of hard to understand sometimes. This one worked for me so much better. So Dual Timeline, wonderful book, not that long. The Nickel Boys. And those were my 3. And then what I am reading, this is one that I pulled off my shelves. This is Black Rabbit Hall. I pulled all of my possibles off my shelves because I am trying to read down my shelves. So let me read the back of this one. Amber knows that the hours pass differently at Black Rabbit Hall, her London family's Cornish country house, where no 2 clocks read the same. Summers there are perfect and timeless. Not much ever happens until one terrible day. It does. More than 3 decades later, there's your little timeline, Lorna is determined to be married within the grand ivy-colored walls of Pencray Hall, known as Black Rabbit Hall, among the locals, but she's drawn deeper into the overgrown grounds. She soon finds herself ensnared within the house's labyrinthine history, overcome with a need for answers about her own past and that of the once golden family whose memory still haunts the estate. And so that is what I will be reading, hopefully, maybe, we'll see. Final category is historical fiction about an actual event. So the first one I have is a book that I read for the first time last year. Actually, 2 of them I read last year, I think. And this one is another one that's it's big. It's, what was it? Like, oh no, it's not. It's like almost 500 pages. And this is The Dovekeeper by Alice Hoffman. This is set during the Siege of Masada. I also learned something very important about the Siege of Masada, which I can't tell you because spoil the book. But here you follow 3 women. So 3 women or 4 women? 3 or 4 women who are in Masada when the Roman army attacks. You get their history up to there, what happens. I did have to put this book down a couple times just because it does get a little intense, but definitely worth it. This is one of my favorite Alice Hoffman books. If you are curious about Alice Hoffman, but you aren't sure about magical realism because she is known to dabble in it, this one doesn't really have magical realism. However, the version of Judaism, which is reflected here, is much more of, I don't want to say traditional, it's much more of an ancient version. It's not Judaism as we know it today, if that makes sense. But it's very interesting, really interesting. So definitely The Dovekeepers. Okay, the second one I have is by one of my favorite authors. And my daughter borrowed this book and ripped the corner. That's 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes. Natalie Haynes is, of course, known for her Greek mythology retellings. This one is not as much mythology. This is the retelling of the Trojan War through the eyes of the women. True story. I told my husband I was reading a book about the Trojan War through the eyes of the women, and he said women had nothing to do with the Trojan War, to which my daughter yelled at him, "The war was fought over a woman." Anyway. So, yes, I quite enjoyed this. This does not have the humor you would find in Stoneblind. It wouldn't probably be appropriate for that humor to be in here. If you know some of the Greek myths, even though the gods are they're not really played as much of a part in this, but if you know some of the Greek myths, like Clytemnestra and those sorts of things, you will see that reflected in here. Wonderful book. I loved Stoneblind on audio. I did not listen to this on audio, but I have every expectation that the audio of this will be very good. Natalie Haynes she's a broadcaster. She knows how to talk. So, and I believe that she does do the audio for it. So, 1,000 Ships. This was shortlisted? Yes, shortlisted for the Women's Prize. Okay, and the third book, I have sort of an agenda with this book because there are 2 books written about this real event, and one of them I do not like, and that's the one that gets all the attention, and I really want to focus it on this one because this is a much better book. And this is not a big world event. This is not a war. It's not anything like that. But this is about the 9 days when Agatha Christie disappeared. And this one is The Mystery of Mrs Christie by Marie Benedict. And this follows the time. Now, it really kind of follows it through like her husband's eyes. This is a much more fact-based novel than the other one. What's the other one called? The Christie Affair. That's what it's called. The Christie Affair by Nina de Gramont, I think. That one goes way into fiction. Like I read that one and I was like, what? This one is really more tied to the facts. And if you are really interested in what happened to Agatha, what possibly happened, we know what happened to her. We don't always know the why of what happened to her. This one is a better book for it. Marie Benedict is a solid author. She doesn't, I don't want to speak badly of the other book, of the Christie Affair. I just don't. But I really didn't like that book when compared to this one, because I think this book did that same thing so well. And the Christie, anyway, I don't. You could also read the Christie Affair if you wanted to. I'm just saying, I really like The Mystery of Mrs Christie. But yeah, so that's my take on that one. Read that one. What I will be reading is another book off my shelves. I got this last year through the currently reading indie press list. And this is Rednecks by Taylor Brown. So this is about the West Virginia mine wars of 1920 and 1921. Not a big historical event that comes to everyone's mind right away, right? I know next to nothing about it, so I am excited to learn more. Let me read this one. Brimming with high-stakes drama from America's buried history, Rednecks tells a powerful story of rebellion against oppression. It's very timely. Can you hear the airplanes? It's the air show. I know you're seeing this like a week later, but that's the air show. Russian. In a land where the coal companies use violence and intimidation to keep miners from organizing. Doc Muhanna, a Lebanese-American doctor, inspired by the author's own great-grandfather, toils amid the blood and injustice of the mining camps, risking his life and career to treat sick and wounded miners. Frank Huggam, a Black World War I veteran and coal miner, takes dramatic steps to lead a miners' revolt with a band of fellow veterans. And Frank's grandmother, Beulah, fights her own battle to save her home and grandson. So I've heard good things about this. I've not seen this around a lot. It sounds really interesting. So I'm hoping it works for me, and then you'll see me telling everyone to read it. But this is what I plan to read. So there you go. If you would like to put forth any names or recommendations, please do so in the comments below. If you do any recommendation videos, let me know. Be sure to tag us Read Historical Fiction 2025 so we can find you and tag the hosts. That would be fantastic. And I look forward to a month of reading a lot of historical fiction. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.